Hello, this is a little walkthrough through Hype Scroll Magic. I have updated the repo a little bit. I also wanted to give a little introduction how to use Scroll Magic and talk about what it is. So Scroll Magic, Hype Scroll Magic is a wrapper around Scroll Magic. Scroll Magic is a established library. It's a little bit dated and hasn't been updated that much, but it has served its purpose. It has a great backwards compatibility, and it's mainly replaced these days by Github, but that's a whole suite of stuff in animation. So we have our own animation engine in Hype, so we actually only need a scrolling tracking library, and it was kind of easy to integrate. So what we have with Hype Scroll Magic is a wrapper around Scroll Magic. It's a so-called glue code. Therefore, when you import Scroll Magic, here's your quick installation via CDN. So you basically hot link it to your project. I will always suggest downloading it and including it into your project for production. But for the quick turnaround, you usually use the hot link, and there's a slight risk of breaking changes introduced when I update something, but all in all, it's the fastest way to get started. But what I wanted to say is that, as you can see in this case, this extension is not included by itself. It's included on top of the existing Scroll Magic. So Scroll Magic 2.08 is out, and here's the glue code Hype Scroll Magic for getting it working in Hype very easily. And down here is also another version with 4 includes. So we have Scroll Magic, we have our glue code, Hype Scroll Magic, then we have Hype Ruler Helper. It's just a ruler I wrote once, you can just include it or not. Gives you a little ruler on the side. I probably will expand that project in the future also to have more options. Then we have Hype Scroll Magic Plugin Debug. So this is a customized plugin for debugging in Hype, and it basically helps you see where your trigger offsets are and points. This usually you would use this in production and this for development. The only difference being those two includes here. So if you remove those two, you're basically left with that. And as I said, in production, you would probably download either version, the minified, and include it directly into your project. Okay, so let's copy this and head over to Hype, create a new project, go to head HTML, enter the two. Oh, I'm actually not going to use, I'm going to use the one with debugging, so the 4 lines. Head over to Hype, include it all, get it all aligned, and now we are ready to rumble. What we have to do is we're gonna create like a very high stage, so we can have some room to scroll. And let's start off with an element we're gonna position at around 1,000. Let's bring in a rounded rectangle. Why not? Position it at 1,000. Let's see. Yeah, I nearly eyeballed it. 1,100 top. Okay, that's fine. And now let's give it some color. Red is fine. Needs a border, just to make it a little interesting. Okay, so reposition at 1,000. So our animation is going to be from here a little bit over to the right. So let's give it a duration, move it over to the right. And probably we're gonna also give it some rotation. So 360. How about that? Yeah, I think that's fine. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay, if you would preview this, you would see, first of all, we have the ruler imported. We have our animation down here. It's already finished. Let's reload that. Now we see the animation is running. Nothing hooked up yet. So how do you hook up this to your scroll? You just go to the identity panel, then you go to additional HTML attributes, and you basically add data scroll timeline. This tells Hype Scroll Magic that you want to have this thing animate based on scroll. The value here would suggest the timeline you want to scroll. As there is a default, this basically defaults to the main timeline. Just by adding this one data attribute, we should be good to go. So now you can see that there is a start for the main timeline. Basically, we would scroll down. Here's the start and here's the end. And this brings us to another important concept. Let's first see it working. This other important concept is that there is a start for the animation and there is an end for the animation, and there is a trigger for the animation. All those three parts you can see here. We didn't define any of those. Let's jump over to the repo. If you look at the repo, you see that the main data attribute is data scroll, and there are two other main ones. It's the offset and the duration, but they are not needed as they are being inferred by if you don't declare them yourself. And how are they deferred? They are referred by the bounding box of the object. So the first one, data scroll offset, says where should my animation begin, and that's the offset from all the way up here, from 0 all the way. So the animation should begin at 1100, and then we have a duration. That's the other. How long should my animation run for? And that's also inferred by the bounding box again if you don't declare it yourself. And so this is about, you can look it up, it's about 106 height. So it's about 100 pixels, a little more. And those are the two lines you can see here. Start the main timeline, end the main timeline. So it's just above 1200 and starts at 1100. And the trigger in the middle is basically the point between those two, determining the progress of your timeline. So if your timeline is like 2 seconds long, this will be second 0, and this will be second 2. So now you can scrub on the timeline forth and back and forth. And I think this kind of illustrates the whole thing. Having the start and the end point being auto-determined is actually also very useful, because if you don't declare them and put fixed values in here like 900 and 1400, you could kind of determine them with data values here. But you can do one little trick. You can remove the scroll indicator here, group the whole thing, and have this group with a boundary box, and use this boundary box of the group as your bounding box. To declare this group around it as your bound, you could call this bound, you can just declare the scrolling element on here, and now it will look at the element here to declare the bounding box. So let's have a look. Now you see our invisible box around kind of made us a bigger area to scroll over. So this is really nice because it has the added benefit that you can move this whole thing around and you don't have to kind of adjust beginning and end values. The other concept is that you can declare a timeline. So if you have your main timeline doing something else, or you don't even want to have any animations on the main timeline, why not just take this animation, remove it from here, create a new timeline. Let's call it my animation. My animation. And then we can add it here. So this animation is not part of my animation and not part of my timeline anymore, the main timeline. And just to update how this whole thing works, we have to go on our bound. We have here our data scroll timeline indication. Now we can declare here which timeline to scroll, because as you learned before, if you don't declare anything, it's going to default to the main timeline. So my animation. So there we go. And it still should work. Yeah, there we go. It still works. What else can we do? There is the concept of the trigger. So we were talking about the trigger as the third component. We just talked about the bounding box. And now let's have a look at the trigger. The trigger, as you can see, is at the half point of the viewport. So at 50%. So that's the whole way how the trigger is defined. If you don't define it by declaring the trigger, as you can see, the trigger is a value you can put onto your element. If you don't do that, it assumes that it should be at the halfway point, so at 50% here. And if you want to move this trigger to another position, so maybe you want to have your animation run when the element hits the top of the screen, you would have to set your trigger to 0%. And the percentage is here not a number between 1 and 100 or 0 and 100. It is between 0 and 1. So let's move the trigger point all the way up here. This can be easily done by declaring data, scroll trigger, and setting it to 0, so 0%. And if we look at it now, we see that our trigger has moved up here. And here's our start of the animation. Before, it would trigger at the half point. So you see now nothing happens. And if the animation start point hits the top of the screen, it starts and will finish the moment we scroll to the end. I don't have enough length down here. Let's change that quickly to make this 3000 height, so I have the room to scroll. So now I could continue scrolling, and here comes another thing into play. You can already see that while we're scrolling, we're also moving our object out of screen. We could play around and put the end and the start further up and kind of let the animation hang out of our boundary box. But there's also another concept of pinning. And pinning is also done very easily. You can that's one of another option you can use here. If you have a look here, it's an optional attribute, and you would basically just tell the object to pin. So basically, you say data scroll pin, and that's all you have to do. It doesn't need a value. There is no use of the value until now. Maybe in the future, but just the presence of this declaration tells it to pin. And how does a pin in this case work? We can have a look. The moment we come in with start, now we can see that this start will kind of stick up to the top here, and the animation will run through until the end hits the trigger point, and then it will be unpinned and pushed off screen again. So there is a time where we can witness our animation. This page still continues to scroll, but the whole thing is kind of pinned to the viewport. And that's very useful. Okay, so we have the concept of symbols in Hype. So we can also just make a new symbol from the whole thing. And we have to clean up a little bit now after ourselves. So this bound, all our declarations here, we should move them out on the outside of the symbol. Let's remove all this. Also, when you create a symbol from something that has a timeline, your symbol actually also copies the timeline. So we have the timeline inside of our symbol here as well as outside of the symbol. It's a different timeline, don't confuse them. And on the main timeline here is also, we can just remove it here because we don't need it here on the it's just in the symbol now. So on the outside of the symbol, we can declare that it's a scroll timeline, and we have to tell it again, it's my animation. So as you can now assume, this declaration, the Hype time scroll glue code for scroll magic now recognizes this as a symbol and searches for a timeline inside of the symbol and not anymore on our scene. So this should work now. Let's have a look inside. We can actually also ungroup. We don't need that bounding box anymore because our symbol has a bounding box. So this will determine the beginning and the end. And let's have a look. So basically not much has changed, as you can see. Only our trigger point has moved down here because we have removed the trigger point from 0. It defaults back to the 1 here. And you can see it's still working, even though it's a symbol now. This is really funny now because we could just duplicate the whole thing 3 times. And the bounding box also moves a little bit, as you can see. It shifts, because I just moved them a little bit on the vertical axis, and it still should work. And you can see that we have a slight offset in the triggers. You see we have 3 end triggers, we have 3 start triggers, and they all correlate to one of those symbols here. And this is also a very good moment to talk about indicator colors. So I call those over here indicators, and those indicators can have a color. This is mainly only for you, for debugging, because the indicators and the ruler will be removed in production in most cases. You could give your little animations, let's give them a little background color so we can see them, just to make them a little more, the symbols itself, because we have like a slightly offset animation. So we can now give each of them a color if you want to, just to the indicators. So let's assign an indicator color. So we say red, green, and here you go. So this is very easy for you to kind of determine what animations are currently running. Oh yeah, there is the concept of a horizontal scroll. So each element can be triggered by either a vertical or horizontal scroll. So as you saw, the bounding box, if you don't declare the offset and the duration, this is declared by the bounding box. You could also use this kind of idea to horizontal scroll. Let's just take our symbol here. Let's make it a little longer, not as high. Let's just make it be like this. We could also move the whole thing in here a little bit more. And we're gonna move this up all the way to the top. Actually, I want to demonstrate the horizontal aspect. So we don't need the height anymore, 600 height, and let's make it 3000 wide. So if you have a long scene like this, we have to only just declare now that this whole thing is a horizontal jump axis and be shown here on the top. And it's all it's needed to make it a horizontal. It's just this indicator. There is no parameter. So now you see, when we preview this, we have our start animation indicator, and we have our end indication, and here's our trigger. It's at the half point of the screen width, and you see it works all as expected. You can move this trigger point around however you want, and there you go. I think this concludes the little introduction. There are much more things we could talk about, like there are custom behaviors that fire the moment your animation starts and ends, like when those 2 points pass each other. There are ways to programmatically add a scroll timeline, because we were declaring a scroll timeline through data attributes. You can also do this in code. When you do it through code, you have a much more granular way of reacting to the progress. You can kind of use the progress for whatever purposes you want. And that's kind of what it does. It's pretty powerful, and if you use it wisely, you can make some pretty awesome scrollytelling stories. I hope you have fun.